So as I said yesterday, we're going to go through the verses the Gemara cites as God's eulogy of Moshe Rabbeinu. And God, the verses that God quotes as he's carrying Moshe Rabbeinu from the mountain of Levi, where he passes, which is in the territory of Reuven, and he's transported to the territory of God. And as he's being transported, the Gemara has different opinions, whether they're disagreeing or just complementary either way, but the Gemara has different opinions as to which verse God said at that time. So we have a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 versions.
I think there's more than 6.
Right? Or is it 6th one already? Yeah. 6th one. 6th one, yes. Yeah, 6th one. Yeah. And
12 mil by 12 mil.
yeah. So we suggested that we'll try to explain this on a Kabbalistic level. And we described the framework by which we're going to explain this. And essentially we're identifying 3 levels climbing upward. BINA, level 1, above that CHOCHMA, level 2, and above that Keser, level 3. So I just want to make this clear before we go forward. I'm not sure if I clarified this before, that when I explain these things using the analogy of human consciousness, I don't mean that the levels are themselves consciousness, but human consciousness is a way of understanding metaphorically what level we're talking about in relation to the divine. Right? So the way I understand things is not the same way God does. It's just a parallel. It's like saying God's arm. God took us out of Egypt with an outstretched arm. So we understand that outstretched arm is anthropomorphic, and we're using arm as an analogy to describe strength or reaching out or kindness or whatever it is that we're trying to relate. So likewise, it's true when we use these analogies of human consciousness, they're anthropomorphic. It's a metaphor to describe a divine revelation. So just make that clear before we start. So as we explain these levels, remember, even though we're using human terms, we have to remember that these are only analogy. We're talking about divine spiritual truths that transcend all human experience. But we have our human dumbed down version of those divine truths, and we use those dumbed down human versions as a metaphor to explain or to try to get some sort of idea as to what these divine energies look like or feel like or are. So let's work our way up. BINA, CHOCHMA, and then Keser.
Those are the divine conscious levels?
BINA, CHOCHMA, and Keser, yeah. So we're going to describe them in the parallel of human experience, and that will give us a way of understanding what they might be like in the divine origin or source. So we start with BINA, lowest of them. BINA, as we explained, is expressed in the word me, Hebrew me, mem yud, which means who. And BINA, understanding, is when an idea is fully fleshed out, understood, analyzed, comprehended, understanding, a full breadth, depth, width of an idea developed and applied, or not actually applied, but thought about where it could be applied, what are the limitations of this idea, and so on and so forth. Now, this level, BINA, this is where the source of, the earliest source for potentiality of negativity, that which is opposite of God, or Gevura, divine judgment, stems from this level of BINA. Gevura, yeah. Divine judgment, or strength, comes from this level of BINA. Now, why is that? So if we're going to use the human analogy, it goes something like this. judgment, right? Strength, judgment, discipline comes specifically when barriers are made. This is deserving, this is not deserving. This deserves more, this deserves less. And that only comes after there is a full-fledged understanding of an idea, and that's when you can put the parameters around it. So limitations, parameters, come from BINA, and when there are limitations, when there is restriction, that's where judgment comes in. You yes, you no. Following?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now this strength, this discipline, this strict lines is the source, the root of anything that can become negative. So let's explain why. Let's further understand this a bit more, right? So we just explained, right, that through understanding we get to judgment. Such yes, such no, right? Drawing lines between what's right and what's wrong.
Because you have a full understanding of all the parameters.
So
then
there's the right word.
You can sort of limit things now because
Precisely.
the whole gamut.
Parameters is exactly the right word, because it says here's where it works and here's where it's cut out.
Right.
Here's where it doesn't belong. Let's compare that with the level of CHOCHMA, which is the level above that.
Find loopholes in something until you know
all the rules.
Holes.
Right. So let's compare it to CHOCHMA for a second.
Okay.
So if we did the level above BINA, level of CHOCHMA, level of wisdom or insight, right? So when there's a pure idea, and the idea pops into one's mind, so the verse actually says, there's death, but not with CHOCHMA. Now, the reason for this is a play on the words, but the reason for this is because when you have the burst of an insight, in that moment, there's no right and wrong are not defined yet. We are yes and we are no is not defined yet. The only thing we're aware of is the truth of this insight. That's what we're aware of at this moment, just the truth of that insight. Once you get into the yes and no, now you're already gone to BINA. You've already analyzed it. Right? When that burst comes into the mind, the entire mind is filled, the whole experience is filled by just the truth of that insight.
Right,
which is why there's a level of...
delineated yet.
It's not delineated.
Like, there's some great idea.
And if it's a truly great idea, you're in Hebrew you say mishtomem, you're silent in the face of this idea. It's like, wow. Right?
Yeah.
So
it's still an awesome event.
It's an awesome event that you're just in awe of. This is wow, which is why CHOCHMA is associated with bittul, surrender. Because you just surrender to the truth of what this is. BINA has less surrender because BINA is already critical. It's analysis. I'm critical of it. So I stand here in judgment of the idea and saying, where does it belong and where doesn't it belong? Again, that word judgment. Whereas with CHOCHMA, there's no judgment, there's acceptance. This is what it is. Wow, oh my gosh, it's overwhelming.
It's almost like someone wins the lottery at the first glance, they're like excited. Oh, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. But then when they have a chance to sit down and say, okay, I really have this. Maybe I'm not going to do this or do that.
Right. If they're smart, if they follow through.
Yeah.
So which is why, so CHOCHMA has its, so to speak, pitfall, is that it leads to pure chesed. Right. So if BINA analysis leads to judgment, you yes, you no. CHOCHMA, which is this wow, just leads to chesed. Let's just give everybody.
It's unbridled.
It's unbridled, which is why chesed also has, if it's not checked by gvura, can have negative side consequences because you're giving to places that don't belong.
So
but it's not restriction. Sorry?
It also has a negative side.
Yeah, but it's not in the restrictive sense. It's in the sense of giving too much. Giving too much. Whereas in the BINA side, it's restrictive. You following?
Yeah.
Now, the source for by the way, just the parallel to this is, so we have our three forefathers, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, right? So Yaakov is a third level, DAAS, which maybe we'll get to soon, but Avram is associated with Chesed.
Yaakov is Gevura.
And Yitzchak is Gevura. So Avram, which is Chesed, pure Chesed, unbridled good, the consequences, so to speak, is that he has the son Yitzchak, but he also has a son Yishmael, giving good where there's too much, where it doesn't belong, right? And then actually Sarah has to tell him, send Yishmael away. So to speak, like the consequence, the quote unquote negative side effect of overdoing chesed is Yishmael. And Yitzchak, Gevura, overdoing Gevura and judgment, negative consequence is Esav. Whereas Yaakov, who's a hybrid in the middle, all of his children remain faithful. But that's just a side note. Following? So let's go back to the side of Gevura then, because this is where we are right now. The side of BINA / Gevura. The analysis.
So in other words, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Step back. So in terms of Esau,
Yeah.
being the negative side of Gevura,
Yeah.
Is that the rebellious child when a parent is too strict with their child?
Something like that. Unreasonably strict, not balanced in their strictness. There's negative side.
They have this rebelliousness.
That's right. That's right. So then there's another element to that, which is like this: the way how does so in relation to God, right? In relation to God, the existence of that which appears, let's say, idol worship or sin, is a creation of Hashem also, which means it has divine energy in it. But the divine energy that's in it must be constricted to the nth degree, to the point that it's completely concealed within the existence of sin. And thus sin, even though really its existence is because God brought it into being, but it presents itself in opposition to its life source, to God himself, right?
Yeah.
That is a consequence of Gevura, constricting the energy to the point that it gets to this, even a place of negativity, even a place that is sinful, because we've constricted it so, we've constricted the energy so tightly, right? It's been diminished and diminished and diminished and diminished. Right? The process of diminishment comes on the BINA side. Right? CHOCHMA is not diminished. CHOCHMA is just give.
It's
expansive. BINA is, so, let's get this word correctly. So CHOCHMA is not so much expansive as much as it is giving. Chesed becomes expansive because CHOCHMA itself is just a point. CHOCHMA itself is just a point. It's just a kernel of an idea. So it isn't expansive yet. In that sense, BINA is expansive because BINA elaborates on the idea. But its expansion in BINA is coordinated, delineated with specific parameters. So that's the expansion that happens in BINA. So BINA is actually is the first yesh. It's the first something, because it begins yes, right. The sense of I begins in BINA. I have to analyze and understand, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in CHOCHMA, there's no I really in CHOCHMA. It's just about the idea. It's about the truth of the thing itself. Right? So this I that's in BINA that says yes, the sense of I that gives parameters and rules and restrictions eventually leads down the line to a full-fledged I known as sin. I do what I want, even though there's divine energy embedded in it. Right? Which is why the first verse the Gemara quotes here is, okay, so now let's understand this now. Let's do a little further now. Because the source of Gevura, of strict judgment, comes in BINA, comes in this restrictive understanding and restrictive analysis and judgment, right? That's where the source of punishment is, because you don't deserve, right? That's where that negativity exists there, because we give a little bit of tiny amount of divine energy, so restricted to the point that it can give life to something which is negative. And then judgment comes from there and says, you don't deserve because you went the wrong direction. All the slicing and the judgment comes there. The truth is there's an element of giving of divine energy that goes to negativity from chesed also, as I mentioned, Yishmael, because you're giving too much and therefore goes to the wrong place. But we're looking now on the BINA side, specifically on the judgment side. So we have this rule in Kabbalah, which is Eina dinim nimtaken ela b'sharsha, which translates as judgments are sweetened in their source. So if there's, God forbid, a judgment, if there's God forbid, a judgment on a Jew and with some sort of negative consequence, so the way to sweeten that is to go back to BINA, right? What this means is to take the harshness and bring it back to its source in its analyzation, and there to be rectified. There to be rectified, to be reanalyzed, as it were, and to be reconfigured, that this too becomes good. And that's the only way to sweeten it. That's the way it's sweetened. This is the way This is how Kabbalah explains sweetening of the judgment. You have to take.
You have to go from where the issue arose.
That's right. Where did the issue come from to begin with? Go back there, reconfigure in such a way that it's now positive. It's now positive. Teshuvah, by the way, also there's an element of teshuvah related to BINA because of this as well. And reconnecting my understanding to Hashem and thus fixing the mistake of how I behaved. This, by the way, also parallels Shabbos and Yom Tov, as explained in Chassidus. Yom Tov is associated with joy, and Shabbos is associated with delight, pleasure. Shabbos is tainug, pleasure, whereas Yom Tov is simcha, it's joy. Right? The difference between delight and joy, it's a subtle difference. And here's the different part. Here's the difference. In joy, it's about how I feel. I am happy. I'm excited. Right? And when a person is very happy, right, this is where joy comes from negativity rectified. That's where great joy is. Right? Or put it a different way, when a person's in a state of joy, he's willing to be much more forgiving. A person's state of joy is willing to be much more forgiving. Right? So this is the BINA experience.
The joy is a rectification of,
yeah. That's right.
Judgment.
For sure, a person's vindicated. There's immense joy when a person's vindicated. Sorry?
That's it.
Yeah. Whereas when a person's in the state of delight, they're just basking in the experience. That's the CHOCHMA experience. Where a person's just basking in the beauty of what the truth that's been revealed. Right? So, and if you want to think about it this way, joy comes from the bottom up and delight comes from the top down. Right? When there's a personal simcha in the family, there's a combination of both. It's a combination of both joy and delight. But if we're going to separate between the two, there's a very subtle distinction. If we're going to separate between the two, delight just comes from enjoying the experience, and joy is not just enjoying the experience. You're animated about it. There's a sense of I here, much less than in the joy where a person just surrenders to the beauty of the experience, right? Like the difference between dancing to music versus watching a beautiful sunset. Right? When a person's watching a beautiful sunset, the person's motionless. There's a very deep joy, a very deep pleasure, delight in just being in the awesomeness of this experience. So you lose yourself in that moment. It's kind of like, that's the CHOCHMA experience. That's the Shabbos experience. When a person lets go of all of reality and just lives in the divine experience. Whereas Yom Tov, there's a joy, and this explains why on Yom Tov there's certain prohibitions that are allowed, that are not allowed on Shabbos, and so on. Okay, so we have CHOCHMA and BINA. BINA interacts much more with the world outside of it because it's a world of judgment and rules, and therefore negativity can be fixed over there. Whereas with CHOCHMA, there's no negativity to begin with. See, there's the key. It's not as if CHOCHMA has negativity, but with CHOCHMA, there's no room for negativity to begin with. It's only in BINA where there's room for negativity, because if there we analyze and say you deserve and you don't deserve. CHOCHMA doesn't talk about who deserves and what it doesn't deserve. CHOCHMA is just basking in the beauty of the experience as it is. Right? So there's no room for negativity in CHOCHMA, and therefore there's no really rectification of negativity. It's only in BINA where there's room for negativity. That's where we rectify it. Right? Because BINA begins to interact with the world outside, because we're framing this new insight in the parameters of reality, giving it context. Where does it belong? Where doesn't it belong? Right? This analytic. Whereas in CHOCHMA, just escape from reality and just enjoy the experience of divine revelation as it is. Okay. So, having said that, now let's look at the first verse. The first verse where the letter 16 is. The verse reads, the first verse that God says. So we're going to translate it Kabbalistically. The word me means BINA. You see it? Live begins with the word HaKadosh Baruch Hu, amen? And it says me.
Okay.
See it?
16, you said?
The letter 16 should be there. I don't know if you have that. Maybe you have it in Hebrew. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 9 lines from the bottom of the page. 5th word.
Okay.
Me, yeah? Yeah. Okay. So me yokum li mereim. BINA, me, the word BINA, Yakum limereim stands for me with those that are negative. That's where it begins. That's where it gets fixed. Bina can come and say, you are misbehaving because you broke the rules. We're talking about Moshe Rabbeinu's rebuke. That's how Rashi translated it yesterday. The Moshe Rabbeinu's rebuke is what God says. Who's going to stand for me for those who do wrong? Rashi translated, who's going to rebuke those who misbehave? So now it's using the word me as Bina. Bina is the one that rebukes those who do negative. Because Bina says, you broke the rules. Here are the rules. You broke them. Chochma doesn't talk about the rule. Chochma is like, what do you mean negativity? It's all God. What negativity exists there? Bina, me, the word me, Bina, can stand and say that was wrong. And then we said yesterday that the second half of the verse, mi yatzav in parla oven, is the one who can advocate for the negative, who can transform the negative into the positive. That's also Bina. Because Bina is the one that interacts with the world outside. So Bina can first and foremost say that was a mistake. And secondly, Bina can say, come here, let's fix this up. So it's me, it's the word me, it's the Bina that does this. Level 1. Following? Now comes level 2. The
remedy of the problem.
It's both the
problem itself.
The remedy of the problem, not in the problem itself. It's in the source of the problem.
The source of the problem.
Right? It's in the analytics that led to that problem. Right? So you have to reconfigure analytically, right? So at the analytics, the Bina can first of all say that was a mistake. Because look, here are the rules. Here's how we figured it out. That was a mistake. So it's rebuke that comes from Bina.
It's like a course correction.
Course corrections, right? Troubleshoot. So Bina.
Go back to where the road split.
That's right. Go back to where the road. That's correct. So Bina, the analytics can tell the Jew that was a mistake because here are the rules that broke down. And then Bina can say, come back here, let's reconfigure this and figure it out so we can go in the right direction. CHOCHMA doesn't do that because CHOCHMA doesn't have an interaction with negativity. It's just all good. It's all God. It's just surrendering to God himself. So what interaction does it have with the mistake? It doesn't have any interaction. If CHOCHMA wanted to interact with the negativity, it'd have to go through Bina.
So it was how Bina interpreted the CHOCHMA.
Exactly.
That screwed the thing up.
Precisely. It's the way Bina interprets CHOCHMA that puts the rules, what's right, what's wrong. And that's exactly the next verse. So the next verse, what do we have? We have mi ka chacham. 13b, yeah. It's 8 lines from the bottom. You see the word aven, ushmul amar mi ka chacham. Right? So the first verse says Bina's interaction with the world outside and says it can correct and rebuke. So me, Bina, yakum li mereim, can speak to the negative and say that was wrong because here they broke the rules. And yisativ li m'poil oven can fix up the mistakes by reconfiguring where we went wrong to put it back in line, as it were. Because that's where the analytics are. But where does Bina get its power from? Where does Bina get its analytics from? We just said it 2 minutes ago. Where does Bina get its analytics from? It comes from CHOCHMA. Bina itself has to analyze the idea given to it by CHOCHMA. So what's the next verse say? Mi ka chacham. So the simple reading was, who is wise now? Right? Who is wise now? That was the next verse. Mi ka chacham. But now for the word mi means Bina, mi ka chacham. Bina is like the Chochma. That's proper Bina. Proper Bina is when it's like the Chochma. When the analytics stray from the original point of the original idea, right? It's not a good Bina anymore. This is what Kabbalah calls nekuda behechala, the point in the chamber. The point is the original idea of Chochma, and then the chamber is the analytics about it. But sometimes a person can do analytics. In business, you know this also. A person does analytics so far that a person stops and says, what was the original idea again?
Right.
Right? Because you can go on and on with the analytics and forget the point you started from, and then you can completely misunderstand everything.
It's like when a business is sold and you have good management and everything, and then.
But you lost the kernel of what you're trying to do.
Idea there, but when you have a new set of people in there doing it.
There's an expression like losing the forest for the sight of the trees or something.
Lost the forest for the trees. Yeah, well, that's a little different. That's talking about missing context. But over here, it's like if you have an original idea,
right,
and then you analyze it. By the time you're done the analyzation, you forgot what the original idea was.
Right.
Right. So you have to stay true to the original idea. And that's mi ka chacham. So in other words, even as Bina, which has a sense of I, because it's doing analytics, in order for it to be right, it has to be ka chacham. It has to be like the Chochma. It has to be like wisdom. Otherwise, you lost it. And that's Moshe Rabbeinu's talent. Moshe Rabbeinu's ability is to be Bina, but remain true to Chochma. To have all the analytics, understand all of Torah and analyze and break down the rules and so on and so forth, and never lose sight of where the Chochma, where it originally came from. So even as you're going through the analytics, and analytics means a sense of self, remember that it's God's idea here. You have to be surrendered to the original point. And what's the next thing BINA does? Mi yodeya pesha davar. Mi BINA connects the level now of yodeya to knowledge to DAAS. And this DAAS is pesha davar, creates the reconciliation. That was the other praise that, as Rashi explained it, that Moshe Rabbeinu was the one who's able to do reconciliation between God and man. Right? So, and that specifically is connected to the word yodeya. Mi yodeya pesha davar, who knows the reconciliation of the matter. Right? And we explained yesterday how Moshe Rabbeinu has the ability to connect God and the Jewish people. Right? Now, specifically, this idea of connection comes in the next level, which is DAAS. So you have CHOCHMA, original idea. You have BINA, the analytics, and we're doing proper analytics, and this analytics is staying true to the original core idea, but it doesn't stop there. It doesn't stop there. Why is that? Because at this point, you can still have
analytics. Sorry, when you say analytics,
BINA,
how you're interpreting the information,
how you're interpreting the original idea.
In a negative lens or positive.
However it is, but you have to stay true to the original idea. That's the challenge. That as you're doing the analytics, to stay true to the original idea. It could easily get distorted. So it has to be me ka. You have to have the me, the BINA, like the chachma, staying true to the original idea, to the original insight. But it doesn't stop there, because at this point, that's right. At this point, there can still be cognitive dissonance. A person can come with all the right conclusions in his mind, and when it comes to how he feels about life, he feels completely different. So let's talk about a relationship to God, let's say, in our relationship. Remember, this is all parallel to the truth of divine revelation. We're just describing it in human terms to try to understand a little bit. So let's use an example of our relationship with God. So you have an idea. God watches everything I do. And I analyze it. What does it mean God watches everything I do? How does he watch? How does it work? How does he watch everything in the world? So this explains this in great detail. What does it mean that God watches everything we're doing? Right? The divine providence, Hashem is watching everything I do, and every move I take is coordinated because Hashem has a purpose, and so on and so on and so on and so forth. So all these, and I spend an hour and a half thinking about this and learning about it, and I'm really, really understanding it properly. So the original insight, God's watching, plus all the analytics of the Chochma and the BINA, and it's all true and good. Right? And then the next day, I still am anxious about making a decision. Why am I anxious? You just finished explaining to me that God's watching everything you're doing. What are you anxious about? So what happened? Why is a person still anxious? Because there's a certain sense of cognitive dissonance. I understand one thing, but I feel a different way. I understand intellectually God's watching everything, but I feel I'm nervous. There's still I.
Where's the emotional component fit into this?
Where's the emotional component fit in here? That's right. And there's the big challenge, and this is what DAAS is. That's the level of DAAS. The level of DAAS is translated often as knowledge, but it's not a proper translation. The real translation of DAAS should be intimate knowledge. In fact, the first time the word DAAS appears in Torah is to describe intimacy between Adam and Eve. And Adam knew Eve.
Right.
It's a description of their intimacy. Right? So in terms of our cognition, what does that mean? That I should be intimately connected to that which I understand. Right?
Through and through.
Sorry?
Through and through.
Through and through. Not just that I should understand cognitively God watching me. I actually feel it here.
Right.
That's a much bigger challenge now. Right? But if I can get that, then I've made connectivity. And that's this verse here. Mi yodeya pesha davar. Mi BINA leads to yadiya, to DAAS, and then pesha davar, then there's a connection.
Well, it's like we were...
Then there's real connection. You following?
Yeah, but how does this relate to BINA, where you...
Because you can only have it.
You need the right...
You can only, yes, you cannot connect with an idea that exists like, okay, God watching me.
Yeah,
Okay, let me connect to it.
CHOCHMA, you have the idea.
But if you don't have BINA between them, you can't really have DAAS either.
No, for sure.
You have to first fully understand it, and then you can truly connect to it. If you don't fully understand it, you try to connect to it, you're gonna be like, but there's so many questions I have on this thing. How am I connecting to this? I have to first of all answer all the questions about it. So make sure.
Does it go CHOCHMA to DAAS, then back to BINA?
No, it's CHOCHMA to BINA to DAAS. An idea, fleshed out, fully understood, from every angle you can answer every question about it and explain it in detail, and then you can connect to it. That's DAAS.
Okay, but if you took the wrong course.
If you took the wrong course, then BINA failed CHOCHMA. Because BINA misanalyzed the CHOCHMA. It wasn't true to CHOCHMA. So
Is it DAAS that rectifies the BINA?
DAAS takes the BINA and brings it into my feeling. Make it real. So in some ways, DAAS does get back to CHOCHMA, because at the end of the day, what are you connecting with? You're connecting with the original kernel idea, which is the CHOCHMA, right? That's what you're really connecting with, this simple truth that God's watching me, and using this example. Let me use a different example, which is more human, but it's the same pattern. Someone offended me. That's the idea. The guy offended me. Then comes BINA, my brain, which says, this person offended me. Do you know why and how bad his offense is? Because he thinks this and this and this. And because he thinks this and this and this, he thinks this and this about me. And he said this and this. And it's so offensive because really yesterday I did this and this for him. All these analytics about this little thing that the guy offended me. And after all the analytics is done, then I think about further, this guy is such a horrible person. And I think about that so much to the point that I start to get emotionally angry. So there's the CHOCHMA, the idea the guy offended me, the BINA, the analytics about that offense. And then there's the DAAS, how personally terrible it is that this guy offended me. And that DAAS makes me feel emotion. This is in the negative sense.
Right.
But the same thing's in the positive sense. God's watching me. It's so amazing. God's watching me. He loves me and he's watching me and all these things about it to the point that I feel God's love because I understand so much of how much he's watching me, even though I'm so insignificant. And I love Hashem. There's the emotional element. All emotion is born that way. There's an idea, there's the analytics of the idea, and then there's a connection to the idea. That's DAAS. So that's why the verse here says, so first we explain in the first verse, we're talking about how BINA has the ability to communicate with the world outside and say, that's wrong and fix it up. First verse. The next verse in praise of BINA is, number one, Mika Chacham. Proper BINA is when it's true to the Chachma, to the original idea. And then the proper understanding can lead to Yedeya, to know, to truly connect with the idea. And then that, Pesha Dova becomes the connectivity, the reconciliation between emotion and idea. Following?
I think it's.
I lost the dot part. I don't get it.
I don't know.
Sorry?
Sorry. Yeah.
No, it's not really a question. It's just really a comment. I'm still kind of blown away that there's like in Sotah, 13b, we're talking about CHOCHMA, BINA, and DAAS. Like it's in Gemara.
Yep, it's all one Torah.
Well, no,
all one Torah.
But they're supposedly they're opposite ends of the spectrum.
It's all one Torah. That's one of the things they were taught us. That's all one Torah. So every part of Torah must be connected.
Right.
Well,
especially with Drush. So this is that glue which brings all these elements of Torah together.
Yeah.
So this brings all.
Don't see Kabbalistic.
No.
So I tried. This is all my suggested reading. I haven't been listening. So if I'm wrong, you can disregard everything I say.
But I mean, you don't have to try so hard. It's not like you're drawing faraway dots.
I think I'm doing pretty good. Yeah.
It's written in plain text.
I think so.
I
think so.
That's the bottom.
Anyway, so what are you missing in DAAS? What are we missing? So put it this way. DAAS is this ability to take an idea and make it personally mine.
That's the emotional.
That's the emotional element. That's right. When I take an idea and say, this is mine, now I get emotionally attached to it. That's DAAS. It's intimacy. It's to know it intimately. It's a real thing to me, not just an idea that exists.
That can somehow affect the BINA, right? And affect the analytics.
In some ways, but if
your example about this guy, he offended me, you develop it in DAAS, you get emotional.
Actually,
you're all you think about is this guy offended you.
Right.
So that's going to create new CHOCHMA, or it could, right?
Yes, it could corrupt it. It could go back and corrupt. Yes.
Or completely destroy the analytics.
That's correct. But if that's true, because that's in a negative sense. So the DAAS can affect them. Yes, bad emotions can can corrupt the BINA, but in a proper way, it goes the other way down. It goes improperly. But even there, with the anger doesn't come just because of the idea. It only comes after I analyze the idea of how bad it was.
Yeah.
So BINA has to play a role before I get to DAAS also. And then it could corrupt it, yes, in theory.
Yeah.
I can get emotionally involved and corrupt my analytics 100%. But before I got to the emotion, it went through CHOCHMA, BINA, DAAS. All emotion starts with an awareness.
And isn't
I'll give you an example. A baby may not necessarily be afraid of a lion coming toward it.
Yeah.
Why? Because it doesn't have an understanding of what a lion is. You understand it. Now you're afraid. The emotions are born by something you're aware of. So you have to have an idea. You have to understand the idea. And then when the idea becomes personal, there's a lion running toward me and I'm afraid. That's the DAAS element. It's real. It's an intimate fact. The lion's actually here. I'm not afraid of lions sitting right now. If a lion walking through, now I'm understanding. Even though I know lions are scary, they only become scary to me when it's intimate, an intimate fact. That's DAAS. So to take an idea, God's watching me, and make it an intimate fact, God's watching me here, not as a theoretical thing. That's what DAAS is. It's intimate knowledge, to make the information, to make it intimate to me, which is why it's pesher dover, as the verse says here. It's the reconciliation, it reconciles to make it real to me.
So it's almost, that's the part where you start to develop the fear.
Sorry? That's correct. You start to develop
I
any
should
emotion.
do this,
Right. Or I love it. Even love.
Right.
Whatever the emotion is, it's all going to come from the fact that this idea is real to me, which for some people is a problem, by the way, when things are too real to them. There are some people who get anxious when they hear that there are people who like this. I mean, it's an unfortunate thing, Let's say, for example, the building collapsed in Surfside. Okay. So there are various degrees. Everybody understands the same information. Let's just say 10 people understand the same information, but certain people are more anxious about it, they're more fearful about it, or less. So obviously the people who live around the block from it are going to be much more anxious and fearful. Why? They have more information than I do here in Montreal, not necessarily, but there's an intimacy that they have that makes them more fearful. It makes them more anxious about it. Not because they know more information. My brother lives in Florida and he's completely shaken up by it. Not because he knows more about it than I do necessarily.
Or 9/11.
Because it's more intimately connected to it, right? When a Jewish tragedy happens, when we feel more intimately connected. So it's not a question of cognitive information as much as it is intimate connection to it. That's the DAAS element. It's the intimate connection to it. And some people have this, it's either for negative or for good or positive. All information that comes to them becomes immediately intimate, and they become anxious about things that are unrelated to them. You're anxious about a plane that was hijacked in Russia. Why are you anxious? Living here in Montreal. Because they just have everything, all information becomes intimately connected to them very quickly, and it sometimes cripples them, right? And then there's people in the reverse. Someone dies right next to them and they have no they know the information, the guy's dead, but they don't feel anything because they have no intimate connection to it. They completely isolate the information for intimately. That's the DAAS component.
That's what fear is, right? Fear is an intimate
connection to that thing. So is love.
Information.
All emotion. That's correct. All emotion is intimacy. Whether it's fear, love, anxiety, it's all intimacy. It's intimacy in the term of that it becomes real and personal to me. Right? It becomes real and personal to me. That's the DAAS element. Taking some piece of information that was developed by BINA and making it personal to me. That's the DAAS element, which is why it says here, pesher dover, who knows that me, the BINA, becoming Yedea, becoming DAAS, now pesher dover, now there's a reconciliation, that becomes connected to me on a personal level, and I start to feel it.
This is like gold.
Following?
So
okay.
One thing
now we still have to go further. We still have 2 more levels to get to.
Okay. I'm kind of blown
You
away.
master this, you master a lot of life.
Yeah.
Kind of blown away by this other
By the way, that's what Chabad's called Chabad.
No,
To get ideas about God, understand God, and then DAAS, become intimately connected with those ideas. It's not that Chabad is about intellectual exercise per se.
Well, intellectual for
correct. The whole point, that's right. Chabad's philosophy is that the proper way to get emotionally attached is if you have proper intellectual relationship. So it's Chabad, DAAS, and then finally you can get the DAAS connected. By the way, DAAS is called in Kabbalah, Meitzer Hagarin, the constraints of the neck. Narrow, because your brain can be very expansive and your heart can be very expansive, but the connection can be completely missing, which is the DAAS element. It's got to squeeze through the neck. In fact, the brain can be expansive, very lofty, amazing ideas. The CHOCHMA and the BINA, let's say, the ideas are lofty and the analytics are lofty and the analytics are staying true. And then I have great feelings, but nothing to do with the actual understanding. My feelings are about myself, and my ideas are about God. Because the DAAS, the neck, the connection between these 2 things are missing. It's the most difficult part, is to take the ideas you understand and make them personal and real to the point that you feel for them.
So what I'm surprised about, maybe I think I understand it because you answered your last question, but like DAAS is the third of the intellectual attributes.
That's right.
And yet we're describing it with emotional properties.
That's right, because it's the bridge.
Right.
It's the bridge.
Right.
So in one element it's emotional. In the other element it's actually no. I'll just give you this. The tefillin has 4 compartments on the head. What are the 4 compartments for? Chochma, BINA, and the other 2 are what? DAAS. Why is DAAS in 2?
Oh.
Because DAAS becomes either chesed or gevura.
Oh.
Because DAAS, DAAS, for example, is just the connection to the truth of the thing. But once I'm connected to the truth of it, I'm really connected to it on a personal level.
Yeah,
it has to be one of 2 ways. Either it makes me express chesed or retreat, gvura.
Right.
in whatever version of retreat, whether it's anxiety, fear,
Right.
or discipline, whatever kind of retreat it is, that's all on Gvura side,
Right.
or expansiveness, whether it's love, compassion, giving, or letting go of anything, whatever, expansive. So DAAS becomes two, Chesed and Gvura. So it's a bridge.
Yeah.
That's
Do
right.
the others, do midos have bridges to the intellects?
DAAS is the bridge between intellect and emotion.
Okay. But what about like Tiferet? And Tiferet's also in the middle of the.
Yeah, okay, we're not going to go right there now. But the Tiferes is an emotion that comes together. Is a bridge. Is a what's the
And
word?
they're all connected.
Yeah, but Tiferes is a
So
blend between Chesed and Gvura.
DAAS
Right.
is not emotion per se, it's the bridge.
It's correct. It's making that idea real,
But it's
and
more
when it
intellect.
becomes real, now it becomes.
Intellect.
It's making the idea real,
Yeah.
or making the idea personal. And once it becomes personal, now it becomes emotional. So it's the bridge.
Right.
Right.
Would you say, but it's more intellect than emotion?
It's because it happens here.
Right.
How do you exercise DAAS? Not here.
Seems like it's
You
so-
exercise DAAS in the mind. This is
Right.
real. This is personal. It belongs to me.
Right.
And I tell it to myself up here enough to the point that it squeezes through the neck to actually feel
What's
something.
the importance of it having to be personal? I'm answering my own question. I think it's because it's the fuel that then allows you to behave or act the way
And that's
you
correct.
should.
It's the
Because
fuel
without
that
emotional element.
you're not
it's
acting.
like a-
That's right. Without that emotional
you
element,
need to
you're a
charge.
professor who understands everything in the world, but never gets up in the morning to get anything done.
Yeah, exactly.
That's correct. So that's right. DAAS becomes
Catalyst.
a catalyst for activity, which is again why it's Pesha Dover, it's the connection. The reconciliation between God and man is specifically when DAAS happens. When it becomes personal to me, now I can connect to God really. When I understand God,
It's real.
it's some kind of relationship, yes, but I'm left out of the relationship because I feel something else completely. It's only once I have DAAS, then there's Pesha Dover, then there's the reconciliation between God and man. Now I'm really connecting because I feel something.
Yeah, no, that's key.
That's right. And then, okay, we're running out of time, but let's just go through the next levels here. Okay, you know what? I'm going to stop over here
All right.
because what we've done today is the intellectual exercise that leads to making it personal. CHOCHMA, BINA, and DAAS, as expressed in these verses. Me, Yakum Li Mereim, me, BINA, is what can interact with that which is negative outside and say, you belong, you don't belong. And then me, Ka Chacham, proper BINA, is only when it follows Chachma. Analytics is only proper when it stays true to the original idea to Chachma. And then me, BINA, when it's properly understood, can lead to Yedeya, can lead to an intimate connection to its knowledge. And that way, Pesha Dover becomes reconciled with me personally. And I can truly connect to the idea, I can truly be attached. Connection between head and heart. And then that way, heart, the person, and whoever else he's connecting to. And in this case, connecting to God. And tomorrow, the next three are going to be going back to the top. Where does Chochmah come from? Where does insight come from? How did the insight come to my head? How did it get in there?
That's a good question.
Right? We started off with the assumption that the idea is there. The idea is there. That's Chochmah. The idea is here. It was insight. And I'm blown away by the insight. And then I start to analyze insight and then I make it personal. Okay? Chochmah BINA DAAS. But where did the insight come from? That's going to come, in God willing, in the next few verses. Me, Chachma, which I alluded to yesterday, wisdom comes out of nothing. What exactly this nothing means? And this idea that there, the word there, Moshe dies over there. What does the word there means? That's going to be, God willing, we'll talk about that tomorrow in more detail. So some Kabbalistic Gemara. Okay, wonderful day. Koach HaMaskal, yeah.
Teaser.
Koach HaMaskal, yes. Keser, in the language of Kabbalah. So this is you call Koach HaMaskal and Kabbalah. We can get into it. Okay, wonderful day.